talk about #Cloudlife and what it means to build a meaningful cloud in your environment. A little bit about me. My name's Amy Manley. I'm a specialist at University of Chicago, where I'm leading up the automation effort. I also have, obviously, a passion for virtualization and automation. Also, I have some kids and wine involved in there, too, in my lineup of passions. And I'm also a 3-time vExpert, and I've been a speaker at the Chicago and Wisconsin vMugs.
All right, I'm Nick Colyer. I'm the Cloud Management Automation Practice Manager at Ahead. So I work with an amazing team there, and what we do a lot of is how do we piece together Azure, AWS on premises, and then figure out all the automation technologies there. So just like Amy, I had the pleasure of working with in a previous job, have a passion for cloud automation, love wine, traveling, my daughter as well, not necessarily in that order, and 3-time vExpert. I present multiple conferences, sometimes with Amy. So.
And with our powers combined, we are 2 ninjas, 1 blog. And that's where we started co-blogging. And we also have a Twitter handle at 2 ninjas, 1 blog, where you can follow our posts.
Yeah, and the goal with the blog was really everything we do in the environment, real world, how do we show exactly how to configure these things, rather than just talking about everything at a high level. What does it really mean to kind of configure this stuff?
Right, real world examples, not just canned lab type experiences, but this is what I've encountered, this problem, and how did I fix it? So sharing that real world experience.
All right, so what's on the session agenda? So what we're going to cover right now is why cloud? What do we mean by, the term gets thrown around so much, so I think we always have to kind of level set with what's the problem we're actually trying to solve here. Lots of choice when deploying apps. I mean, we heard it this morning in the general session keynote.
Mega cloud.
Mega cloud, yeah, exactly. And what does that mean? When you break it back down to the app layer, how do you actually deploy applications? Amy's going to give us an introduction into vRealize Orchestrator, a very widely used tool, and what she's doing at UCMC, and then we'll really kind of tie it all back after her experience into Cloudlife, #Cloudlife, because we talk about programming a lot, but there's this art to a cloud as well that's really, really important. And so I'll kick it off here, just with the problem, and Amy can attest to this. It's like, we're trying to solve this problem. It's like musical chairs, I think, as you said, at the organization.
I mean, like many companies, UCMC, we have a lot of teams, there's a lot of handoffs. I need an IP address, so the ticket gets thrown to them, you wait for them. So we want to reduce the amount of handoffs and automate that process and get fewer handoffs as possible.
Yeah, and ultimately, this is a very infrastructure as a service focused example, but the thing here is not to overcomplicate it, right? The goal is, whether you're an app developer or a general IT customer, you want a place to go to request that service. Now, that may be a service catalog, it may be via an API. So if you're going to build cloud services and expose them to your app team, you may want to give them an API or a catalog, which we'll get more into. But this middle layer, this kind of these green boxes you see here, this we see a lot, regardless whether it's PaaS services, infrastructure as a service, services. There's a lot of orchestration involved to get all the components up and running in the environment, and then the things that run inside the operating system are typically handled by your configuration management software like Chef. So, it could be as simple as, Amy will talk about, ServiceNow, Orchestrator, Puppet. It could be, your CA catalog, could be vRealize automation fronting these things, depending on your use cases. But the goal is keep it simple. Don't just buy a whole bunch of tools if you're not going to use them effectively. And if we start thinking about the app deployment, there's really a number of approaches you can take here. So, infrastructure as a service approach, if you look at the slide on the left, what you're looking at is an app server. So this is a virtual machine you would deploy. Orchestration would take care of getting that VM online on the network with CentOS. CentOS 7 in this example, could be Windows, whatever your flavor of OS is. Then we got our MySQL server on the right-hand side there. Same thing, orchestration's got that online on the network, but then you got all these little blue boxes in the middle there, and that's where we're inside the OS now. Our configuration management tools such as Puppet or Chef, Salt, Ansible, whatever you're using, really kind of takes care of. And this is, really interesting because now we got containers, right? So let's take the same thing. Well, on the left, we got a lot of flexibility. We can deploy all these components, all these pieces of software. Containers make that simpler because we can containerize things and deploy those on top of OSs. And there's a whole discussion around containers we're obviously not going to get into right now, but there's different ways to deploy those. But then it gets really interesting in the public cloud world because we're starting to experience this now where we're blurring infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. These first two use cases, you can see I've got VMware, Azure, AWS there. This deployment model works regardless of location. But when you start to use has services such as AWS and Azure, if I want to say I want to get out of the business of managing SQL, but I still want to deploy my app, I can replace that SQL server with an Azure database or an AWS RDS service. I'm still going to use orchestration, but it might be that I use cloud formation templates in Amazon and other techniques to get the services online and ready to be handed over. And so, I think to focus on orchestration, I'll hand it kind of, you can hear it's an important point. So
sure, as
UCMC.
As an end user, we had to ask ourselves, how are we going to get there? And first was standardizing and creating a service catalog and realizing what tools do we have? Do we need to buy new tools? So we looked at VRO, we looked at VRA, and VRA seemed a little too much for our environment, so we realized ServiceNow could be our front-end portal and use vRealize Orchestrator for our workflows. So after standardizing and using the tools, then the end result is less time for the engineer because it's automated, and a better customer experience because they're getting standard VMs delivered at the same time every time. So where to start? As I mentioned before, you need to stabilize your environment. I did work in an environment with Nick that we had outages every day. So you're like, I never have time to automate. How am I going to do this? So create a heat map, find where your pain points are, and fix that. And then carve out time in your schedule and just dedicate an hour and log off the email, log off the instant messenger. Then create standards for those processes. If you don't have a standard for deploying a VM, how are you going to automate it? You need that step-by-step documentation, which we all love documentation. And then in the end result, you get this service catalog, and they're all little building blocks you can use where you can clone a server or just add an item to your CMDB. So defining my current state was, wow, we have Excel spreadsheets, great.
That's Amy in the middle of the
yeah, I'm crying because that's when I started the job, and I was like, how do people request VMs? So they request it by filling out an Excel spreadsheet, the engineer gets it, and then they go back and forth with the app owner. And then there's also this lovely QA form with multiple tabs for the VM engineer to make sure the VM is defined by is following standards. So it was a complicated process, and it took maybe about 2 weeks to complete a VM build. So we knew this wasn't good, and this is how we could sell it to our executives that we need automation. So what you can see are little microservices that these are the building blocks of automation. You take the small tasks, the small repeatable tasks, and you write a workflow for it, such as joining AD or updating your backup system. And here we have a little animation where you're requesting an IP, which is a sub workflow. You can run it on its own, but stitched together, you create a master workflow where you're updating the DNS, you're load balancing, and maybe updating your backup environment. So my vRealize Orchestrator Journey was why Orchestrator? It's free, vCenter. So, and then my past experience, I already had that skill set to bring to the table, thanks to Nicholas. And there's also pre-built plugins, and VRO 7 has there's even more that have come out. FlowGrab has workflows we've put up there and other people in the community have put up there. It's a little daunting at first, but it is easy to learn. And once you master it, it's like riding a bike. So your personal cloud can become a hybrid cloud, become public cloud. So the cloud comes alive. So what you see here is inside vRealize Orchestrator, just the build out of the master workflow. These are all my sub workflows within it. So you don't want to start out with a master workflow. You want to do the building blocks first. So first I have my host placement. Is it a prod server? Is it a development server? Which host should it go on? Or is there a resource pool for it? So it should go into the development resource pool. Same with the data store. Is it going to go in the development data store, or is it going to go in prod storage? Which one has the most amount of free space? And then even server naming is now automated. So they've decided it's DevBox on a certain VLAN in the network. Well, that's going to work with my naming standard and feed my workflow to clone the VM. So this is the visual binding within a workflow, the master workflow. And this isn't clicking. There we go. This is the sub workflow inside the larger workflow. You'll see that the input parameters are mapping to the sub workflow input parameters, so you're feeding in from the master workflow into your sub workflow. And then you're also outputting from your sub workflow to the master workflow, so you can reuse that information again. So, and then on the bottom you see what are general attributes. These are local to the master workflow and are reusable again. So an example workflow to talk about in my environment is environment decisions, which I ended up turning up into the host placement workflow. I pretty much covered that. It's should my VM reside on the production host? Should, what data store does it need? Depending on, now it's a tier 1 box. Okay, now it needs to move to the tier 1 resource pool. What template am I going to use? Is it Linux? Is it Windows? So, and then the end user's not going to know which port group it needs to be on, so they need to answer those security questions because we like to VLAN everything in our environment. So after they answer if it has PHI, then the proper port group will get connected to the NIC. So it's one of my key workflows. Also, there is help. Not only do you have great things like vBrownbag, but there's FlowGrab, there's the VCO team, there's the community on VMware. Nick's doing a Brekkie as a service at 7 a.m. on Wednesday.
Pretty cheesy title, but we love it.
Well, you're cheesy. I'm British. So Baz 2.0, so tweet at vNick if you need any more information. And then there's our blog that we're shamelessly plugging, where we like to share. We like to share information. So there's a lot of help out there. Just use it.
All right, and just kind of taking a step back, we kind of get into the weeds there on orchestration and how to build workflows out. But again, keep this in mind across the clouds. And as you start to use that term cloud, certainly at ahead when we talk to customers, it's like it's your business, it's your cloud, it's very unique to you. And when you start to think, okay, I want to create my own cloud, build your own service catalog, and that's going to contain services from the public cloud, from Azure, from AWS, from vSphere. You're going to take those services, you're going to wrap your own business logic around them, and then present them as services in your cloud. Because if you just go to Amazon and consume an Amazon EC2, VM, equivalent of a VC, a virtual machine, for anyone not familiar, you still got to patch it, you still got to install software on it. From an infrastructure as a service use case, you still have the same areas of automation involved. It just gets more and more complex as you start to introduce those PaaS services that we kind of talked about earlier, where you don't want to do the database anymore. You have to use that orchestration available in the public cloud. And again, just think of it, your cloud. How do you want to expose those things to the business? Because if you give somebody access to the AWS catalog and have them go to town, well, you're going to have a pretty big mess to clean up. Especially people, we couldn't even maintain lists of VMs before. Imagine having to tag load balancers and everything else, and VPCs and security groups. There's things you've got to manage in the public cloud, and it's not saying don't use public cloud. I think it's fantastic, but it's just use it wisely so you can scale it. And that really brings us up to something that's, Amy and I have been very passionate about talking about, and talking to a lot of people about, it's like who creates this cloud experience? Because I think we're very quick to just throw new titles out there, and, a lot of conferences, they talk about programming, and ultimately, like if we just break these three things down, when we looked at the characteristics of what made our team very successful at, Catamaran and myself and other companies I worked with, and Amy and her team at UCMC, it's like you absolutely need your existing skill set. So we needed to engage the app development team, the infrastructure teams, and get the information there. Programming is important, but it's not the major thing that everyone keeps saying is the major thing you have to do. A lot of it is this business process, understanding what you're trying to solve. How do you create an experience for somebody at the front end, which really brings us on to hashtag Cloudlife, right? This came up, we were talking ideas with some of our marketing guys the one day, and it was like sick cloud, bro. What does this mean to have a cloud experience, right? It's a place people go. It's where your customers of IT go, and they really want to enjoy. They want to get the services that they actually need, and so we tout hashtag Cloudlife now as when you've conquered this and you've got this experience that everybody wants. And the book that's on the left there, I certainly am very passionate about broadcasting this because this is all about design. And I remembered back to one of my modules in my degree, which was computer science, and one of the things was human-computer interaction. And I had no idea why we were reading this book at the time, The Design of Everyday Things. I mean, it's about like door handles on glass doors and teapots and things like that.
You're gonna burn yourself.
Yeah, I do like a teapot, but anyway. But yeah, it's ultimately how do you create that experience? So Amy talked about that front end menu not being about choosing a network VLAN. You might choose questions. Oh, okay, it's a dev server. It's got HIPAA data on it or something like that.
Right.
Well, that should be the experience for the user, and then the orchestration should be driven off that. How long do workloads stay around? Well, are you going to give them a snapshot? It shouldn't feel like this forced programmatic experience. It should feel like I came to the cloud, I went to the catalog, or I got it from an API, got what I wanted.
Right. It's about the customer experience, not just, yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And then,
so becoming a cloud engineer, I didn't start my job in IT going, one day I'll be a cloud engineer. I didn't know there wasn't cloud. It was just computers. So as you see Moss there, came here to drink milk and kick some ass. And I just finished my milk. So with the, I love that episode. So not only is it about programming and business process and what your company needs, but it's about your own career management. Like I mentioned before, carve out that time for yourself to learn something new. Go on Pluralsight, go on a VBrownbag, listen to it. I'm sure your boss would approve you choosing time to improve yourself. So you're not just a button pusher. You don't want to be a button pusher. You want to work on the cool stuff. So automate the tedious tasks and do the cool stuff. So how did that go? That was magic.
Yeah,
okay.
You're ready for it.
So, and then don't let people, you'll get people who want to rain on your parade. So don't let them tell you that it can't be done. Get team buy-in by including them and talking to them, and then you'll get more collaboration.
Yeah, and we'll leave you with this. Go forth, be creative. I mean, I think that's, the cloud is an art. It's not just about programming. And if there's one thing we can leave you with, it's, creative design and enjoy it. I mean, for me, it's the most exciting part of my career. And,
right, I love it. And please share your experience. If, tweet us, whatever, send us anything. But it'll be great to see other people's experiences.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.